Moving on, Scott, kind of moving out of the draft and college ranks. There were, I don't know how much playoff football you caught this past weekend. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't catch very much, because a lot of Bengals fans are just kind of soured on the postseason and how this season went for the team. But you saw the Steelers take care of business and handle the Dolphins pretty well. You saw the same from the Packers over the Giants. There was a lot to kind of take in if you're an outsider, maybe focusing on, if you're focusing on the Bengals and kind of seeing how these teams operate, what they do in these big games, and what the Bengals haven't been able to do. So maybe give me, depending on how much you watch this weekend, maybe give me one or two takeaways that you think the Bengals should have received in watching their competition in playoff football, and what they need to employ to get back to the playoffs and win in the playoffs in 2017 and beyond.
I'm going to give a strange answer and say John Cooper. And anyone who was an Ohio State fan, the Bengals fans in the Ohio area may remember John Cooper was the Ohio State coach, their football coach, for a dozen years or so. Great recruiter, great teams, great records, would play the first 9-10 games of this year. If you look at his career record up until end of November, it was I don't know. I'm going to make up a number like 90-10, or I don't know, 99-3, just some ridiculous number. But the very last game of the regular season, they'd always play Michigan, and he went like 1-9-1 against them. Just could never beat Michigan. And then they get the bowl game, and he struggled in the bowl games too. I think his bowl game and Michigan record was just absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I think, not to cut you off, I think he struggled in Rose Bowls against USC when they played them, or other Pac-10, Pac-12 teams. And then obviously, as you mentioned, losing to Michigan if you're Ohio State, that's a no-no.
Yeah, and that was one of those things where I remember one time in an interview they asked him, and this is maybe halfway through his career when he was starting to lose games, and he basically said, I don't see what the big deal is. I don't see why people make it to be such a big deal. Obviously, we want to win, but it's just another game. He clearly did not get it, because it was not just another game. It was, for the fans, it wasn't. Obviously, for the team that was beating him every year, it wasn't. But in his mind, we just do what we do. It's just another game. We did this against Iowa. We do it against Northwestern. Michigan State becomes Michigan. Yeah, same game plan, same thing. Nothing special, nothing different. They bring in Jim Tressel. The very first thing he does, he has this famous speech. He comes out during a basketball game, walks out in half court. They introduce him, and he says, I'm proud to be Ohio State's head coach, whatever, and looking forward to 200 whatever 5 days from now when we kick Michigan's behind. And his focus was Michigan. We are going to beat Michigan. That is the one thing we're going to do. And he did. I mean, him and Urban Meyer, and you can kind of look at the Michigan and the bowl games as the playoff games. And that's the one thing that, listening to Marvin Lewis's press conferences, looking at the things they kind of do, they don't really change anything. They just treat that first playoff game as week 18. And I think that's the unfortunate thing, because the opponent is not. The opponent is pulling out all the stops, everything they can do, whether it be funky formations, things you haven't seen before. Okay, we went real heavy, running real heavy, whatever it is. And I think the Steelers did some of that. They did some good stuff with Antonio Bryant in that first quarter, the 2 touchdowns, and seemed to go heavy with, whatever they can do to get that win. That's what you've got. And I just don't get that from Lewis. He just seems to be, it's week 18. We're the home team. Usually we're the better team. We won the division or whatever. Let's go out there. We'll do this. And it gets back to his halftime adjustment thing. Just, there's no such thing. You're just the better team. You kind of have your game plan.
We weren't good enough. We weren't good enough.
Yeah. And that's just that'd be the one takeaway I'd have is you have to have him or someone in there who treats the playoff game like a playoff game.
I agree with you. And, we prep for the show, a day or two before the show and kind of talking about topics, but, we don't really share a lot of our answers necessarily before the show, but you and I here are on a very same wavelength in terms of what a takeaway should be for the Bengals. I'm going to use a little bit of a different spin on it, though, because you mentioned a specific team very often in your answer there. And I think the goal for the Bengals is, I mean, I hate to say it, it is a copycat league and it is what it is, but in terms of emotion, in terms of how you utilize weapons, in terms of physicality, and in terms of building a winning culture, I think the Bengals need to do everything possible to not only become like the Steelers, but their offseason focus should be Steelers, Steelers, Steelers. And there's a lot of different branches to that makes me say that. One of which is the hatred that's been brewing between the two teams, and it's been as recent as just before the postseason. Ben Roethlisberger was talking about some other teams doing, after the whistle stuff, and he said, we don't worry about that unless we're playing the Bengals. He tried to give a little shot there and say that the Bengals are cheap shot artists. So, I mean, the whole thing is the Steelers are usually at the top or fighting for a division title every year. And it's whether it's Mike Tomlin as the coach, whether it's Bill Cowher as a coach, they're physical, their coaches are emotional, and they pull out all the stops, as you mentioned, Scott. I mean, Antonio Brown, they're not afraid to put him back there to return punts because they know that Antonio Brown is their best weapon as a punt returner. And a lot of teams, including the Bengals, probably have certain players that could be back there returning kicks, but they're afraid they're going to get hurt. And that's a viable thing. We saw that happen with Reggie Bush when he was with the Saints and a lot of other places. It's happened. But at the same time, you got to put your team in the best position possible to win a game. And I don't think that Marvin Lewis always does that, and it especially rears its ugly head in the postseason. So I think the focus, number one, for the Bengals this offseason, based on just the first round of the playoffs, is be the Steelers and beat the Steelers. That's one. And the other thing, this is not even great analysis on my part, but good teams get lucky. They get lucky bounces. They get things going their way, and that was evident to me in the Green Bay New York Giants game when Aaron Rodgers threw a Hail Mary, I believe it was right before halftime, and he hit Randall Cobb at the back of the end zone. And it completely deflated the Giants as if they were already not really in a good headspace as it was. But sometimes you just got to get those lucky bounces, those lucky plays your way. And, when you get that in the postseason, normally that's when you start winning football games. So those are two takeaways. I think you wanted to add something, Scott.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the TV series The Office?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the one thing on there, Michael Scott, the manager, is
he's the best. Oh, he's the best.
For the viewers who haven't seen him, and you made a comment earlier about our live viewers, I just want to say we don't discriminate against the undead. So if there's any zombies watching, they're obviously welcome to watch and comment too, as best they can. But on the Office, one thing that he is kind of, because of his background, he wants to have friends. He wants to be a friend more than a manager. He would prefer to have underperforming, lousy employees who like him or who he thinks likes him, instead of having a great, well-run ship. He wants to be everyone's friend, buddy. I'm not going to fire someone who doesn't do anything, who's incompetent, because I just like to have them. Sometimes I feel the Bengals are kind of like that with Marvin Lewis. And you talked about doing what you have to do to win. And we just talked about Nugent in the previous segment. How many years did they tolerate having a below-average kicker? Because he's a good guy. We like him. He's decent. But that's not what you do when you want to win football. If you're truly serious about winning football games, you don't tolerate Nugent for 7 years, let alone 7 weeks. I mean, you are always looking to get better. You're always looking at doing, these mythical halftime adjustments because you're trying to get better. Every series, every half, every play, and I just don't get that sense from the Bengals. And I'm kind of somewhat worried that based on what we've seen and what we just talked about, can they win a playoff game? I mean, how much talent do we have to, shove on this team to overcome that mentality that comes from the top down to win a playoff game? Are we going to be able to overcome Michael Scott and actually get enough great salesmen and accountants and, all this on this roster that despite having him, we're still going to win? We're going to have an office full of Dwight Schrutes and Jim Halperts to be able to have a great team because we have an incompetent manager who isn't really focused on winning. And sometimes I get that sense, just based on our conversation, that's kind of the path we're going down. Is they prefer to keep the veterans, keep the guys who aren't as good, but they kind of feel comfortable with. Yeah, they're a decent, mediocre player, and we're all good, we're all buddy, and we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. We like having our chemistry and this and that. That's nice. That's not going to win you playoff games. That's not going to win you a Super Bowl.
I love that you brought up the parallel between the two, because there's a couple of things. Number one, I don't know how. I think if I remember correctly, when you and I talked off the air, Scott, you were binge watching that show. I don't know how far into it you got. Did you watch the whole series?
We've watched it before.
Okay.
Probably 4 or 5 years ago, we went through the whole series. We're going through it again, and I think we're in season 5 right now.
Okay. So reason being is that Michael Scott is a guy that royally screws up, yet somehow ends up doing something to kind of remedy the situation and ends up coming out clean on the other end. Now, we've seen Marvin Lewis do that where the Bengals have been basically dead and he's gotten them to the playoffs, but we've seen him also not be able to do that. So that's one parallel. The other that you said about him wanting to be liked by his players and being a quote-unquote players coach, there's a great Michael Scott quote that made me think of this, and it was when he was asked about his employees, would he rather be feared or loved? He said, this is Michael Scott, played by Steve Carell, by the way. Would I rather be feared or loved? Easy, both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me. So, and if you know the show, it's actually very, very funny, but it's very accurate. And I think that does play a parallel into Marvin Lewis. I love that you brought that up. That might be a good poster segment on our show there.
I think if we do it, if we try to tie him again, I'm definitely convinced that PJ Dawson is Toby.
There's probably a lot of Tobys on this team. I mean, whether it's Margus Hunt or probably Russell Bodine is Toby, actually. But at any rate,
I like him.
Well, maybe some people do. That's kind of what's that?
As I was saying, the team seems to like him more so than the fans.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's what our takeaways were from this round of the playoffs. We did get a comment in the YouTube chat. Coach from Dylan Hart, Coach Lewis is too conservative. You don't tolerate players who cost you games with stupid antics that lead to penalties either. So, that's obviously something that is definitely something the Bengals need to look at in the 2017 offseason. And I played David Bowie's Changes at the beginning of the show, and unfortunately the Bengals, whether it's Adam Jones's legal issue that popped up shortly after the season ended or some coaching changes a lot of people wanted to see, it doesn't appear that anything, at least for the time being, is happening. So maybe the offseason philosophy is the thing that'll change. We'll have to see. What did you learn from this round of the playoffs? You can let us know. We're available via email, theobinsider@gmail.com, on Twitter @BengalsOBI. All of our materials on Cincy Jungle. Check that out, as well as all of the other writings that is on that show, on that site, excuse me. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube and SoundCloud channels to get all of our material, and we appreciate that you do.